No, all I can see is legislative advocacy make a difference. Can everybody see? Oh, there you go.
There it goes.
Yeah, there you go. Great. Okay, apologies for that. Welcome everyone to our second Faithful Green Leaders Learning Lab. My name's Anna Wimbo, and I'm the Director of Leadership Development at Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. And today our topic is advocacy, and we're going to be learning some strategies and tips on how we can make a difference in environmental policy. We're going to be kicking things off with some short presentations from Joelle Navi of Interfaith Power and Light, Ben Alessandro from Maryland League of Conservation Voters, and then we're also joined by Barb Trader from Max of Frederick County, and also a member of Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Frederick. If you have any questions, you can use the questions box to type in your questions at any time. We're going to try, because of the late start, I think we'll probably just go through the panelist presentation and then have a Q&A session at the end. So let's get started. Welcome, Joelle, and thanks for joining us. Next slide.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Is the next slide coming? I will start talking. Maybe the next slide will advance. So it's awesome to be here tonight. I'm Joelle Novi with Interfaith Power and Light. We love working together with Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake to engage congregations in caring for creation throughout this region. And I wanted to start just by underscoring how important I've come to think it is to include advocacy in the work we do to care for creation in our congregations. It's so valuable to talk about environmental issues and to do worship around these issues and to do reflection. It's so important to like walk the talk by greening our practices in our congregations and thinking about modeling greener ways of living. But in my experience, if you're not doing some kind of speaking out for systematic, larger scale change, nothing that we might do feels big enough to give us hope. Environmental issues, particularly climate change, which is what IPL focuses on, are massive, large-scale problems. And when we only try to respond to them at individual level or at the communal level, in my experience, it's not big enough to feel like we're getting at the scale of the problem. And for that reason, it's hard to feel hopeful about these problems unless we're part of bigger solutions. So I want to, I guess, more than anything, issue a strong invitation to anyone on the call tonight, whether or not this is a bit of a new thing for your community or something you're already doing, but just to, I really encourage absolutely anyone who's doing any kind of green work in your congregation to include some component that gets at larger systemic change, where you're joining your voices to solve problems at a larger scale, even if that feels a little scary or new for your community. In my experience, when faith voices advocate for environmental policy as a moral issue, first of all, you're able to get attention in a way that some of those more likely suspects, green groups that are always advocating for green issues, might not. You know, I've just seen so many times in hearings, I've seen a bishop or a pastor start testifying, and every committee member who wasn't paying attention, you know, their head pops up and they start tuning in. So we reframe issues as moral issues when we advocate as faith leaders, and we get elected leaders' attention in ways that they might not have paid attention to others. This is the reason why it's really powerful to do advocacy in our role as people of faith. If we're calling a legislator and asking for something, we say we're calling from our congregation. and we remind them that that congregation cares about environmental issues. If we're marching in a rally, and I'll show some pictures in a minute to give you a sense of this, but if we're marching in a rally, we can bring the banner from our congregation or wear our congregational t-shirts or the headgear, head coverings, or distinctive stoles of our faith. And I would just, if this feels new and daunting, the other thing I would just say is our specific value is not in being issue experts. It's not necessary when we speak out on environmental policy issues to know every detail of the legislation, nor to know every detail of the science issue we're addressing. Frame the issue as a matter of right and wrong and remind folks that not just quote unquote environmentalists care about this issue, that we see it as about our deeper values and caring for our neighbors. So telling our story is the most powerful thing we can do. We don't need special expertise that we don't already have. I'll just share a few of my tips for effective environmental advocacy as a congregation. And then the rest of my slides are some of my favorite photos of what this can look like. And I'll just, we'll just run through those so you can to get some images in your mind of what faith communities advocating faithfully might look like. So my first suggestion is, whatever group, if you have a green group at your congregation, make sure that green group is in relation. I mean, first of all, if you don't, try to form and strengthen an ongoing green group that can be in relationship, first of all. But once you've got a kind of green team or green liaison for your congregation, you want to establish ongoing trusting relationships with groups like Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake for watershed issues, Interfaith Power and Light for energy and climate issues. My experience is that, first of all, it is very hard for folks in congregations who are either volunteers or working clergy to track legislative issues and figure out where the strategy is, figure out when your legislator is important, figure out when the moment to speak out is, but that's our job. Those of us at IPC and IPL are on lots and lots of conference calls, so you don't have to be. We are representing faith folks that want to be active on these issues in many of these coalitions around this region that are advocating for strong environmental policy. And so we, by being in relationship with the person at your congregation or the people at your congregation who want to take action, we can mobilize quickly and in a strategic way. So I can call up my friend at a specific congregation and say, your legislator is a critical vote on this committee, and the committee vote is coming up next week. Can you help? And we already have an existing relationship and existing awareness of the campaign that we can move nimbly like that and be really strategic and effective. The other thing I found is often congregations, especially those that are new to advocacy, have a lot of questions and trust building to do when they get involved in a campaign. And you can never take that away entirely. Many people in congregations want to kick the tires and ask questions about any environmental legislative advocacy campaign that they might be getting involved in. But in my experience, if you can build trusting relationships with those grassroots allies, like our organizations over time, the activation energy to build that trust for the next campaign, the next year, will be much lower, right? Like we're smoothing the way by being in coalition over time. And that's actually my experience also with our coalition partners in the secular environmental groups like Chesapeake Climate Action Network and Maryland Sierra Club, that because we have been working together, not just on this year's legislative campaigns, but on last year's and the year before, over time, we become like a real movement that can build trust quickly and move together on our priorities. So let's get together, link arms for the long haul. This is not about one campaign or one bill. It's about forming over time, building up the muscles to be a religious environmental movement in this region. There are creative ways to incorporate advocacy into the routine gatherings of your congregation and the routine green team work of your congregation. If you're gathering to show a movie and people are going to discuss it afterwards, think about some action item you can provide that's related to the topic, like a postcard signature or collecting postcards or taking photo petitions. I'll show you a lot of examples of photo petitions in the slides. We love photo petitions because, and I'll show you how they work, but that's something you can easily set up at a table after worship as people are coming by, and give people an opportunity to take action right there in the moment. But I really urge you, if you're doing any green work in your community, even if it's, you know, tree planting or gardening or trash pickup, there's always a way to connect it to the larger issues of which it's a part. You know, a trash pickup is a good time to think about a plastic bag ban in Maryland. You know, those are connected. So helping people make the connection between being part of the solution at their communal, congregational scale, but also being part of the larger solution on the state. And the other thing that I found over and over again is that in many congregations contain a combination of people, some of whom are ready to take environmental advocacy action and some of whom are not ready or are unfamiliar. And there are lots of ways creatively to model and welcome and invite the people who are ready to do that action without forcing those who are not ready to like take a position or do something they're not ready to do. So I would encourage you to avoid inviting the congregation into things that force a congregation-wide position, that force a board meeting to make a decision as a community about things. There are some, especially Unitarian Universalist congregations, for example, that have adopted congregation-wide climate resolutions, and I think that can be an amazing culmination of this kind of work. But if you're just getting started, you know, you can stand up at church and say, I'm going to be going to this rally on Monday. I'm going to bring my car to the church parking lot at this time, and if anyone wants to come with me to that rally, meet me there. You're inviting people, but you're not forcing the whole, you're just sharing with them what you're doing. My favorite story about this is about an elderly couple that I love named Ruth and Fritz von Fleckenstein at the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church, who had been, I think, bringing the church banner or a banner with the church's logo on it to a lot of rallies and protests. And there started to be a little consternation in the church that maybe not every one of those issues or positions had been voted on by the board or vestry. And so they made a social justice team or social action team banner with just the logo of their church's social action team. And then the social action team could just, you know, endorse things, and they could still go to all the same rallies and protests, but with a banner that they felt they could make a discretionary call about whether the social action team endorsed certain things. So, you know, don't force the congregation to have a lot more process or governance involved than necessary, would be my other tip. So I'm just going to run through some photos and talk about them so you can get a sense of what congregations taking environmental advocacy action might look like, just to give you some inspiration. So slides. Okay, this is one of my favorites ever. We are coming up on the holiday of Bshvat in this weekend, which is a Jewish ecological holiday. This was a group of Orthodox Jews in Silver Spring and Kemp Mill who were getting together for a Bshvat Seder, the observance of this holiday. And I let them know about a week before that their state delegate was a critical vote on the offshore wind bill. And so they had the idea to take a picture at the Bshvat Seder and then turn it into a Bshvat card, probably the first Bshvat card that Delegate Kramer ever received in his office in Annapolis. And then it happened to be that some of our coalition colleagues at Chesapeake Climate Action Network were doing a lobby meeting with him the following day on this issue. And so they were able to get this card electronically and print it out and give it to Delegate Kramer on Bshvat and say, happy Bshvat. These Orthodox Jews in your community really care about offshore wind. That was one of my favorite things ever. But it's a moment where pictures, I just think, are really powerful for reminding legislators that actual people in their community are thinking about these issues. And you can see they are not being super legislatively specific here. They just said, happy Bshvat, thank you for supporting wind power. But, you know, he knew what they were talking about. Next slide. This is the St. Camillus Catholic Church had a big Lent retreat for the Latinx community and they Father Jacek, who organized that retreat, called me in advance and said, what are the hot topics right now in the legislative assembly? And we said, well, we haven't passed, the Clean Energy Jobs Act hasn't passed out of committee yet. And so that he had some young people at the church make this banner. And then while everyone was assembled for the retreat, we took this amazing picture of pretty much the full Latinx community of St. Camillus celebrating for clean energy. And that picture is the kind of thing we can put on Facebook. You can tag the legislators that represent Silver Spring, make sure they see it. I mean, this was just an amazing photo. We used it for so many things. This was also a community where Father Jacek didn't think a lot of people in this community would want to put their names on a petition or things like that. So this was like, taking this photo was a really powerful way for this community to speak out. A few more photos. This is another one. We realized that Senator Klausmeier in District 8 in Baltimore County was a critical vote to get the Clean Energy Jobs Act out of committee last year. And we did a lot of work with the Lutheran churches in that region and made sure they understood that they had an opportunity. But this particular photo was amazing because actually my colleague Avery had been at the other Lutheran church in District 8 that morning for an actual planned program, and he just stopped by to see if anyone was there on Sunday afternoon. And they happened to be having some kind of committee meeting, but we already had a relationship. So we said, this is a really critical weekend to get Senator Klausmeier's attention. Can we take your picture with this photo petition? And they said, sure. So we had this like amazing picture right from the heart of her district to share with her, to say that those of us at this Lutheran church are speaking out. So she got messages from both churches that weekend. And this is a tweet that we sent out tagging Senator Klausmeier, but you can see how we use this photo that they agreed to take based on our ongoing education and relationship we had with them, and that we were able to use the hashtags and the tag for Senator Klausmeier to really, make sure she is hearing that her constituents care about this. And I will say Twitter is particularly effective for very small grassroots groups being able to get the attention of legislators. I'll just share a few more. This is just about how a faith community can be a visible presence in a larger rally. This is from the People's Climate March. These are my friends from Green Muslims. Each one of these signs I love for different reasons. This is one of my favorite pictures ever. The first sign talks about, why Muslims, or these Muslims, are committed to caring for creation, and that it's really pollution is a sin in their understanding of their faith. The second sign is a quote from the Quran, and includes the URL for Green Muslims in case anyone's inspired to join them. And then the top one is kind of an advocacy point. It says, let's think about this. Should we be banning Muslims, or should we be banning all these other sources of pollution? So kind of cheeky, but getting at, an advocacy message. So anyway, signs at rallies. This was a kind of an interesting one. We had a lot of folks in Virginia who were sitting in trees to try to block construction of a pipeline through their land. And so we printed out or shared signs that people in congregations across Virginia could put on their trees, on their property, to say we're kind of standing in solidarity with our tree protectors elsewhere in Virginia. And this is a UU church that posed with their tree. And you'll see we use the hashtags for the campaign. The Don't Frack Maryland campaign, another one. This was a church in Maryland where we had people post with the sign after a program. Again, even if the program is educational in nature or about something else on a green topic, you can say, before everyone leaves, anyone who'd like to take a stand, we're going to take a picture and send a message to our legislators. These were some of our messages about campaigns in the last few years. This is about photo petitions and how you can do photo petitions as part of services or right afterwards. Just quickly, top left, we were speaking out to make sure Governor Hogan didn't veto the Clean Energy Jobs Act. This is the Catholic Church. Bottom right, we had a specific message saying, Governor Hogan, please Don't Veto the Clean Energy Jobs Act. This is a congregation in Baltimore on the right. And then bottom left, this is a current photo petition we're doing. These are students at the Krieger-Schechter Jewish Day School saying that 6 coal-fired power plants in Maryland is 6 too many. Just another example of how we can really get legislators' attention. I tweeted out this photo with these middle school students, and I tagged the District 11 legislators who represent where their school is, including Delegate Shelley Heddleman, who replied on Twitter and said, "You bet, I'm gonna support that bill." And I'm so glad to see young people getting involved. So we directly got her attention.
Thanks, Joelle. So we're going to skip these questions and move on to our next presenter. Ben Alessandro is water policy advocate at Maryland League of Conservation Voters. And Ben, I hate to do this to you, but if you can do your presentation in about 10 minutes, that will allow us to have, a bit of a Q&A at the end. So welcome.
All right, I'll do my best to hurry through it. So yeah, thank you so much for giving me the chance to speak here. It looks like some of the words are not showing up. Are they showing up on your end? I suppose not. Well, that's okay. I feel like people can either listen to me or they can read, and not both. So I'll just talk. So really, I'm going to be talking today on how to effectively communicate and educate decision makers. Next slide. Joelle was really spot on in how great that Interfaith Power and Light and Interfaith Partners for Chesapeake and other groups like that can really help you in figuring out who your target audience is. But I'm going to do a little bit to try to help you along that way, just so that you can feel more comfortable as well, being an advocate in your own life as well. So you really want to think about finding your target. Which is the mover and the shaker, which is the elected official, or in some cases, maybe you could also use these tips and tricks for maybe if it's a diocese or, really important HOA member or something like that you need to convince to try to change their behavior and come to your side. So here's some things to think about. First, this is something from Waterwords at Work put together for us. They're actually a great consulting firm for helping with communications and such. But this kind of shows like a general bell curve of environmental attitudes amongst folks between pro and con, kind of plotted out where you can go to the next slide, where you have some folks like myself, the environmentalist professionals, and some of you guys, all the way over on the left is probably like 1% of the population. And sometimes we end up getting a little bit of an echo chamber amongst us. And then you have, next slide, the ones that the lawyers, the lobbyists, the spin doctors working on the other side kind of against us. And those are the ones that are most often actually in Annapolis or in on the Hill, right? And then you have some to kind of 10% that's really strong support for environmental protection. Next. Then you have 30% that's probably generally supportive but not as knowledgeable. Continue. Then there's a bunch of ones that are well-meaning but they're worried about kind of the overarching consequences. Continue. Then you have some of the folks over on the other side where they're starting to be fearful of the impact, the costs and the consequences, etc. And then there's some that are, really reporting intense opposition for environmental protection, even if it really doesn't affect them personally or professionally. So over here on the left side of your screen, that's probably the folks that you want to think about as your top sponsors, your top champions. That if the elected officials kind of all fall on this kind of bell curve as well, those are the folks that in some ways you talk to first when you're trying to get something like a bill or an idea going through it, someone that can really run the ball forward for you. And then over here on the right side is really the folks that I would say is more like your lost causes, right? These on both sides, these are people that are more knowledgeable about what is going on and therefore less persuadable. They're either already on your side or already kind of against you. So the ones over on the right are the kind of lost causes. So the ones you often want to focus on when you're coming in, and this is a campaign that's already going on, is the folks in the middle that are really more persuadable because they're less knowledgeable about the issue. And it's not even your job really to change their mind magically or anything like that. It's to give them the information and the ability and kind of background and connection so that they can help change their own minds. Next slide. So thinking about, which mover and shaker you might want to do. You know, whether it's looking at, you know, county council member, board of, you know, maybe it's church board of trustees, maybe it's assistant director of public works, maybe it's a town zoning board. But thinking about which one is the person that kind of doing a little bit of power mapping is really the one that might be the swing vote, might be the one that is the obstacle, might be the one that, like, as you're trying to tally up, could be the one that really could change what you can do. So there's kind of two ways to go about this as far as changing their mind and advocacy. There's kind of the outside game versus the inside game, if you will. And I'm a huge fan of Calvin and Hobbes, so kind of a comic there, looking at you know, Calvin playing in the outside affecting the house versus the inside affecting the house. Next slide. So the outside game is a lot about what we had just, what Joelle had talked a lot about, is kind of convincing the movers and shakers that some amount of public opinion is on your side, that, you know, your church is on this side, a larger population is on that side. And if you think about activating folks, this is kind of a little breakdown of what amount of Americans have claimed that they have done different things, whether it's sign a petition, contact government directly, etc. This is probably before a lot of the protests in the last few years. Actually, this data was taken, so that 4% is actually probably a lot higher now. But next slide. So I just want to reiterate again that for a lot of this help with the outside game, definitely reach out to Interfaith Partners with Chesapeake, Interfaith Power and Light. I also put little plug for ourselves in the bottom left there. Maryland League of Conservation Voters is also very interested to help folks out, because we really have a lot of expertise, especially in Annapolis, kind of the process and knowing, you know, who might be the good people to talk to, etc. So let me go through some of the different ones from least effective we've seen as most effective for the outside game. Now this is from talking to especially a lot of staffers and folks on the Hill, just asking them, what do they find that really gets most things done? Well, for least effective, a lot of times if it's just social media, like comments or likes and things like that, often kind of get lost in the sauce, not super effective. Especially a lot of these elected officials are older and don't even understand social media as well. Next. Then signing a petition, that can be really good. It's definitely a whole lot better than nothing, but often, like with that, you need huge numbers. Now, you'll often be able to get those more easily, as I showed in the previous slides, of the amount of people that are willing to do a petition versus other ones. So, you know, but as something, if you want to do, just signing a petition probably isn't the most impactful thing that you can do. Next. Writing a letter, I would say, is much more impactful than just signing a petition. Often when you do that also, they'll even have like form letters, even if you can go in and change those to make them more personalized to yourself and your own kind of experience, just so it's not the exact same one as they have as the block for everyone else. It's a lot, will be much more impactful because it'll have a much better chance of being read and actually being pulled out separately. Next. Speaking at a public meeting, you know, it can be very impactful as well, but it's also a very high, you know, like often if you come to Annapolis, it'll be for a long time. They'll have many, many hearings. You have to sit around and then you'll get your one chance to do like 1 or 2 minute thing. Now that can be very impactful, but it's also kind of a high cost, high reward type of thing. Next. One of the ones that when talking to a lot of these staffers and stuff like that, that they find is like one of the biggest things you can do for lowish cost and high reward is a personal call to them. You know, you'll just get their staffers mostly, but if they get, you know, 10 calls on something, you know, they will make sure that the elected official knows it and it's, you know, on the top of their radar, as opposed to you might need hundreds of folks to get onto a petition to get that same response. So picking up the phone and calling them can be a really good one. So now we're going to talk about the inside game. Again, these are the folks that reach out to in helping this, but just a little bit of insight. Next slide. You know, it's really about meeting with the mover and shaker staff or them and their staff. Now, often you'll get to meet their staff. Do not feel snubbed if you meet their staff, right? This is Sarbane's staff, and actually she's amazing and such, but the staff in a lot of cases is the ones that actually do all the work, especially on the nitty-gritty and things. So it's definitely great and important to meet them. And if they don't like you, or if you know, and it can really be a big barrier to you. Next. But of course, next slide. But of course, it is always best to meet, if you can, with the mover and shaker themselves. For example, this is Ben Cardin right here, and to get your part in there. So next thing, you got this meeting, right? Thinking about how to actually take charge of the debate. Take charge of what you're talking about there. Next slide. Yes. So this is actually from North Virginia Conservation. Waterworks at Works had put this. I thought it was a really great quote. The movers and shakers, the elected officials, are experts at getting you into the room, feeling good about yourself without making commitments. And if you fall for that, you really let them off the hook. Next slide. So we don't have time for it right now, but a really fun exercise that you can do, like just pair up or do this at home, is what I call the power of the purple pig. Have somebody basically try to talk about different things, and no matter where they try to move the conversation, always come back to talking about your pet purple pig. You can really do this with anything, but it's kind of a fun way that makes it a lot less stressful than practicing for your thing that you're trying to actually lobby for or whatnot. But I encourage folks to do that. No matter what you say, oh, some way have it tie back to what you want them to hear about your purple pig. Next. So let's say you're meeting, I'm just using this as hypothetical, you want more rain gardens to be planted, environment, these great ones that'll clean out the water and all the polluted runoff in your county. Next. So thinking about how do you do that? So really you want to think about preparing for your meeting, what's the right messages and who would be the right messengers, doing a little bit of research on the person itself that you're going to be talking to, thinking about language, messaging, some winning pictures and materials, and success stories don't help. Next. Don't hurt. Next. So little research on them never hurt. Look online, Google things, look at their bios on LinkedIn, their official websites, their social media presence, any press releases. You can try to figure out what are stuff that they really care about, right? Oh, maybe they really seem to be talking all the time about flooding problems in their community, and so then you can link the rain garden to that, right? Or maybe they love gardening, right? Maybe they are really loving this this local park, something that you can try to make that personal connection from them. So the more you can learn about them, the better. Next. Next slide. Oh. Okay. There we go. And next thing is about speaking their language. A lot of folks will think well, I'm not a super technical expert. But you know what? For the most part, neither are they. And actually, a lot of the folks that are experts can really have them just start rolling their eyes and looking back and forth confused when you try to throw all this complex language at them, all the shop top. Next slide. A lot of people feel like they're experts and they want to go in and say things like, our volunteers have collected benthic macroinvertebrates at various sites in the area, and our data suggests that spreads are impervious surface, blah, blah, blah. This has got a lot of shop talk in it, a lot of technical stuff, and that is really not the way to get to them usually. And, unless your research says otherwise. But, so don't feel like you need to know this stuff, because actually doing that talking that way in the meeting will probably work against you anyways. What you really want to think about, next slide. Next slide, please. What you really want to think about anyways is, what is the connection that you can find, and how do you really talk to resonate with that? If they care about jobs or beautification, community building, flooding, next slide, etc. And thinking about how you can really say it in a way that's kind of takes your personal experience and connect it to them. Next slide. And how you can turn that into an effective message, right? Whether that's through leave behinds and materials and pictures, you even have this. It's just really simple. It's not any technical things of what type of pollutants and particulate matters and whatnot, but just the simple looking at this of Manhattan back then, Manhattan today. And I'm sharing this in case you think that environmental regulations aren't necessary. So, that's one really good thing. There's also some other great success stories. This is like an interactive toolkit that you can use if you are looking for things for water stuff specifically, for how to show great projects in the past, and kind of making that connection. Next slide. But then you have just some great things I wanted to go over, just tips and tricks. we're going to be sending out to you kind of a list of a one-pager of things to remember about these things. But for the most part, thinking about how you can connect them really on a personal level. If you can even tell them, you know, your kind of personal connection, your story, why this really matters to you, and just be a good human. Always, you know, make sure that you tell the truth. Be prepared to be brief, you know, and keep it positive. And you know, kind of make that plan for that meeting so it can be as powerful as possible. So I think I've ran out of my time. We're going over a little bit on my time. Apologies, but
Yeah, no, thanks, Ben. These are really, really great tips that you've shared with us. So I want to move on quickly to Barb Trader, who is out in Frederick. She's been championing environmental stewardship for several years since she retired in Frederick in 2016. And she's a co-founder of Multi-Faith Alliance of Climate Stewards of Frederick. So welcome, Barb. I also want to let people know most likely we'll go probably 5 to 10 minutes over, but we will provide, for those who have to jump off right now at 8, we'll have a copy of the recording that we'll share with everyone tomorrow. So welcome, Barb. Barb, you're on mute. There you go.
Could I get the next slide, please? So as Anna said, my husband and I retired to Frederick County 3 years ago. So the slides I'm showing are all beautiful pictures of Frederick County because it's a beautiful place and we're talking about saving our planet. Next slide. So Max, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how Max got started. It really started with an argument about the Monocacy River. A lot of folks in Frederick County were seeing each other many times at meetings, arguing with how the Monocacy River was going to be taken care of now and into the future. Ben remembers this fight. It was really ugly and very partisan. And several of us got together after one of these really heartbreaking meetings and decided that what we really needed in Frederick County, which is a really purple and very changing county from a political standpoint, we really needed to add a voice of faith. So we got together and strategized. Next slide. So at the first 3 or 4 meetings, we just organized and we got to know each other better. The usual suspects, which I would think would be the Quakers, the Unitarian Universalists, and the Methodists, and maybe a few other churches, were kind of the founding members of MAX. But we easily brought more people along because we'd run into them at other environmental meetings or at just gatherings in the community. We now have about 12 people on our steering committee, and we really celebrated early on that each of our faiths had a strong international commitment through a statement on climate change and environmental justice. Next slide. So we decided to first start with talking about what our mission was going to be and how would we frame why we were together. And our mission is we act locally on our moral duty to future generations by protecting the earth and its inhabitants from harmful impacts of climate change. And by the way, MAX stands for the Multi-Faith Alliance of Climate Stewards. Next slide. So as Anna and Joelle have really emphasized, we come at this from a very different place. We talk about our values, they're front and center. So when we're advocating for change, we talk about our shared values, our reverence for the beautiful natural world we are lucky to live in, our care for each other and for our neighbors, for our future generations, and from a call to stewardship for God's creation. Next slide. We created some strategies so we could keep our cohesiveness, so we could truly be multi-faith, so no particular faith took over, if you will. I believe really strongly in a distributed leadership model. I don't call myself the chair or the president. I just run the meetings. Everybody that participates takes on roles as they feel comfortable that fit their religious community. We do goal setting together once a year, and we always debrief. So we continuously get feedback on what worked and what didn't. We found out a lot of hot button issues that we didn't realize had we not consistently debriefed. Next slide. So after about the first 3 or 4 meetings, then in the winter of 2018, we got really organized and we started doing activities. And so the first half year, we did a lot of community awareness events. We reached out to those people in our congregations, and we also did a lot of activities around the community. Most recently, we did a conference in the fall. We had 125 people there, and everybody there wanted to take action. That really helped push us over the edge of one of the areas of resistance that I'll talk about on the next slide. So we had challenges, and I think most multi-faith groups would have these challenges. First of all, it's hard to find a time to meet during the week because we all worship at different times, and we have different activities during the week. So we found Thursday night and Saturday or Sunday afternoon are good times for us to meet. We still are not as diverse as the community that we live in. We're still working on that. But the biggest challenge we've had is talking people who go to church with other people who don't necessarily see eye to eye with them on everything, talking them into taking on an advocacy role. So that's been our biggest hurdle to cross. And after we did the conference last year, I think it was really empowering for people to get so much feedback from their congregations that they really wanted to do something. It was time to take action. Plus, they'd been talking about climate in front of their fellow congregants for about 18 months, maybe 2 years. And they felt like they had developed a language and an ability to talk from a position of faith. So together, we are advancing a climate emergency resolution with our county council. That resolution will go in front of the county council next Tuesday for consideration. And the city has also taken it on. Frederick City will take it up the next day in a workshop on Wednesday. And the MAX has been the large muscle behind this movement. It feels right to us, and we're really excited about it. And I think it's building that cohesiveness that will take us into other issues. Next slide. So I just remind people that as people of faith, we have some assets that really need to be leveraged for this fight. We have moral authority in front of our elected officials. We can speak from the heart. We can leverage the strong statements each of our faiths have on climate. And we have a larger grassroots network than the typical choir, speaking, as Joelle said, speaking beyond what the regular green groups speak about. So I think we add so much to this equation. Next. And this is the thought we always leave people with. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Barb. And, you know, I just want to underscore the importance of the moral authority that the faith community brings to any and all discussions around environmental stewardship. Yeah, we have a lot to say, and typically we'll find that there's a lot of support for the faith community, our thoughts and ideas. So one of the questions that just came in, we're going to I'm going to pose it to, we'll just take this one question, and I'll pose it to Joelle and Ben and Barb. And it is, how can we impact the primary and federal elections without necessarily talking about specific issues? How would you suggest the faith community bring to the fore environmental issues in the primaries and the federal elections?
Is it okay if I jump in?
Yeah.
This is Joelle.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we didn't talk about this explicitly, but for 501c3 nonprofit organizations, a little bit of lobbying where you speak out in support of particular bills is okay as long as it's not too much. But electoral work where you're actually promoting particular candidates is completely forbidden. It's not just you have to keep it to a little bit. You can't do it at all. So, but that does not mean that congregations cannot play a role in encouraging their folks to vote and in encouraging them to vote with issues and values that are important to them in mind. So I'll describe a few things we've done at Interfaith Power and Light around the 2018 midterms, for example, that that were like kosher ways for faith communities to engage. So one is that we did a workshop in Northern Virginia shortly before actually this was before 2018, in one of their elections, and we made a big banner in advance that said vote on November 7th or whatever the date was with the climate, and instead of in mind, it was in with a heart shape, so like with climate in your heart kind of. And we invited anyone who in the temple at our workshop who was willing to come pose with this big banner, and then we tweeted it out and used it as a reminder to everyone about that they should vote and the day of the vote, and that they should think about climate when selecting their candidates. We have made I'm a Creation Care voter stickers, and then we put the voting information for the 3 jurisdictions that we serve on the back, so people can look up their polling place and the hours that they're available, and people could wear their I'm a Creation Care voter sticker. And then this is mostly through my brother, who's kind of a voting access activist, that I've learned about some of the other things that congregations can do. But one of the most exciting ones that I've heard about is called Parties at the Polls, which is that they found that a lot of people treat voting as like a chore or something that like a test, something they have to prepare for, and if they're not prepared, they don't feel like they can come, and it often feels very solemn and intimidating to people. So a lot of congregations serve as polling places or are in communities very close to polling places, and the idea of Parties at the Polls is just to like announce a big community fun event at the polling place around the voting day, so that people stop by because it's fun and there's a moon bounce and popcorn or whatever. So I believe I might be getting this wrong, but I believe the URL is votetogetherusa.org for this idea of, so a congregation as a 501c3 is totally legit to plan a community party at the polling place around the election day and to publicize it in their community. It's totally kosher for them to get hold of the voter file or to canvass their neighborhood in advance of voting day and remind people that the election's coming up and you hope that they'll vote, not for anyone in particular, but just that you hope they'll vote. And they found that these parties at the polls, I think, can actually increase turnout a few percentage points, which is really cool. So those are all examples of, I think the nice thing is when we increase voter turnout, even when we are legally prohibited from promoting particular candidates, like more turnout generally is going to be, helpful to our issues. So it's never a bad thing to just encourage more people to remember that it's voting day and to vote.
Right. So thanks. I think we're going to have to stop there unless, Ben, did you have some comments to add to Joelle?
Oh yeah, just two quick things. One is the other thing that you can do is make sure that elected officials are asked tough questions about these things, right? And we've actually even published a whole 501c3 compliant guide of things of like, these are questions that you should ask your elected official. And you know, there's a lot that you can do to make sure that when there is, you know, debates and stuff like that, that environmental issues and stewardship is kind of at the top of the agenda. It doesn't just get pushed underneath the rug. And then the second thing really quick, I did just want to say, like, I know I had the plugs for Interfaith Power and Light and Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake, but I should have also included Max as well, because they are absolutely fantastic. And I really encourage folks to reach out to Barb as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, so we'll be following up this call with links to all of the resources that were mentioned during the call. And our next learning lab will be the first Thursday in March. And the topic will be planning green team actions. So we hope you'll join us then. And thanks for joining us today.